The rain was cold, and the blood on Leonard Dante's expensive silk shirt was turning black in the shadows of the alley. The most feared mafia boss in the city was slumped against a dumpster, dying alone after a brutal betrayal. He looked like a broken beggar, and every person who walked by turned their heads in disgust. But then, a pair of small, scuffed sneakers stopped. 8-year-old Alice didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was hurting. She knelt in the mud, pulled a single cartoon bandage from her pocket, and whispered, "Don't cry, mister. I'll stay with you." She had no idea that by saving this beggar, she had just gained the most dangerous guardian in the world. Leonard Dante was not a man you wanted to meet in a dark alley. At 42 years old, he was the most powerful person in the city. To regular people, he was a famous billionaire who owned giant skyscrapers that touched the clouds. But to the criminals in the shadows, he was known as the Ghost King. He was the head of the Dante crime family, and his word was law. He lived in a massive house that looked like a stone castle, surrounded by high walls and sharp gates. He never walked anywhere without 10 armed guards protecting him. Leonard was cold and very smart. In his whole life, he had never said the words, "thank you," to anyone. He believed that money could buy anything and that being kind was a sign of being weak. His wife, Dora Dante, was just as cold as he was. She was 33 years old and very beautiful, but her heart was full of greed. She loved the expensive diamonds and the power that came with the Dante name. Their marriage was not built on love or hugs, it was built on fear and gold. They lived together in their big house like two strangers who shared a secret. Every day, Leonard sat in his leather chair and gave orders that moved millions of dollars. He could make a man rich or make him lose everything with just one phone call. He felt like he was at the very top of the world. He thought he was so powerful that nothing could ever hurt him. He moved through the city like a great shark in the deep ocean, and he thought everyone else was just bait for him to catch. But even the biggest shark can be caught when he is not looking. Leonard did not know that his golden life was about to crash down, and the only person who would care was a little girl with a kind heart. One Tuesday evening, the golden world of Leonard Dante came crashing down. Everything changed in a single moment of pride. Usually, Leonard was surrounded by a wall of bodyguards, but tonight he wanted to handle a secret deal personally. He thought he was too powerful to be touched. He was wrong. A rival gang had been tracking his movements for weeks, waiting for the one moment the Ghost King was alone. In a narrow, dirty alleyway behind a closed grocery store, the shadows began to move. 5 men stepped out from the darkness, their faces hidden and their eyes full of hate. Leonard did not scream, he fought like a trapped lion. He was strong, but there were too many of them. During the struggle, a sharp knife caught him deep in his side. The pain was like ice, and the world began to tilt. Using the last of his strength, Leonard managed to break away and run into a maze of dark back streets. He finally collapsed behind a pile of old, wet wooden crates, his lungs burning. The great billionaire looked nothing like a king now. His expensive Italian suit was torn and covered in smelly mud. Thick, red blood was soaking through his white silk shirt, making it heavy and cold. He looked like a homeless man who had been in a terrible fight. With shaking hands, he tried to reach for his phone to call for help, but the screen was smashed and dark. He was dizzy, and the blackness was starting to pull at his mind. Suddenly, he heard the soft sound of footsteps on the wet ground. Leonard gripped a piece of broken wood, preparing to fight one last time. He was sure his enemies had found him to finish the job, but it was not a gunman who stepped into the light. It was a little black girl named Alice Benson. She was only 8 years old, wearing a faded coat and carrying a heavy school bag on her shoulders. She stopped and looked at the man bleeding in the dirt. Most people would have run away in fear, but Alice did not. She knelt down in the mud right next to him, her big eyes filled with worry. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked in a voice that was soft and kind. Leonard tried to growl at her to leave, wanting to protect his pride even while dying, but his body gave up. Before the words could leave his lips, his eyes closed, and he passed out in the arms of a child who didn't even know his name. When Leonard finally opened his eyes, he did not see the white ceiling of a hospital or the silk curtains of his mansion. Instead, he was in a small, cramped apartment. The air smelled like warm cinnamon and old books. He tried to move, but a sharp pain in his side reminded him of the attack. He was lying on a lumpy, uncomfortable couch that was too small for his tall frame. When he looked down, he saw that his wound had been cleaned. It was wrapped in messy white bandages that looked like they had been put on by small, shaking hands. Alice was sitting on the rug nearby, coloring a picture of a sun. "You're awake," she chirped, her face lighting up with a big smile. She hopped up and brought him a plastic cup filled with cool water. Leonard took it, his mind feeling foggy and confused. He was the most powerful man in the state, a man who could buy entire cities, and yet he was being cared for by a child in a room that didn't even have a television. Alice began to talk, her voice like a happy bird. She told him her name was Alice Benson. She lived here with her mother, who was away working 2 different jobs and wouldn't be home until very late at night. Alice looked at him with sad, sweet eyes. She told him she was sorry that mean bullies had hurt him. She truly believed Leonard was just a poor beggar man who had no home. Leonard looked at his scarred, rough hands and decided not to tell her the truth. He didn't want to see the kindness in her eyes turn into fear. For the first time in 20 years, someone was looking at Leonard without wanting anything from him. He stayed in that tiny apartment for 2 days, hiding from the world while his body started to heal. He watched how Alice lived. She didn't have much, but she was happy. One evening, she sat next to him and handed him her favorite chocolate bar. It was the only treat she had for the entire week, but she gave it to him without complaining. Leonard Dante, a man who had spent his life being cruel and ordering hits on his enemies, felt a strange, tight tug in his chest. He looked at the small piece of chocolate in his hand and then at the smiling girl. He realized that Alice had almost nothing in this world, yet she was giving him everything she had. For a billionaire who thought money was everything, this was the most valuable gift he had ever received. While Leonard was hiding in the small apartment, the city outside was falling into chaos. His right-hand man, Jack, and his cold advisor, Morgan, were furious. They were tearing the city apart, breaking down doors and threatening anyone who might know where the Ghost King had gone. But back at the massive Dante mansion, things were very different. Leonard's wife, Dora, was not shedding a single tear. She wasn't worried about whether her husband was cold or bleeding. Instead, she was packing the marble floors, worried about who would sign the bank checks if Leonard never came back. She was already meeting with lawyers in secret, trying to find a way to take over the entire Dante empire for herself. To Dora, Leonard was not a husband. He was just a key to a throne she wanted to own. Deep down, Leonard knew he had to return to his world before everything he built was stolen. However, he felt a strange kind of peace in the tiny, quiet apartment that he had never felt in his castle. Over those few days, he learned the sad truth about Alice's life. Her father had passed away years ago, leaving her mother to work day and night just to survive. Even with 2 jobs, they were falling behind. A greedy landlord was threatening to throw them out onto the street because they couldn't pay the rent. One afternoon, Alice sat on the floor and told Leonard about her biggest dream. "I want to be a doctor," she said with a bright smile. "That way I can find people who are hurting in alleys and make them all better." Leonard looked down at his own scarred, rough hands. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had spent his entire life causing pain and making people cry, while this little girl, who had every reason to be angry at the world, spent her time dreaming of fixing it. In that moment, Leonard Dante made a silent vow. He was done being a monster. He waited until the middle of the night when the apartment was silent and the stars were out. While Alice and her mother were deep in sleep, he stood up quietly. He found a small piece of paper and a crayon. With hands that were used to holding guns and signing million-dollar contracts, he struggled to write 2 simple words: "Thank you." He left the note on the kitchen table and slipped out into the darkness, heading back to his old life with a brand new heart. Leonard returned to his world like a ghost coming back to life. When he finally walked through the front doors of his mansion, he looked like a different person. He was covered in dirt, his beard was messy, and he was wearing cheap, borrowed clothes. His right-hand man, Jack, and his advisor, Morgan, almost dropped their glasses in shock. They thought he was dead. Dora ran toward him with a fake smile, trying to wrap her arms around him, but Leonard coldly pushed her away. He could see the greed in her eyes and knew she was disappointed he was still alive. He didn't say a word to her. He walked straight to his private office and began making phone calls. He was still a dangerous man, but he was no longer a man without a purpose. He had a new mission, and it had nothing to do with crime. However, things in the city were getting very tense. Leonard started looking into the apartment building where Alice lived. He was shocked to find out that one of his own business partners, a man named Mr. Vance, was the person trying to kick Alice and her mother out. Mr. Vance was being extra cruel to the poor families in that building. He wanted to tear it down to build a giant shopping mall so he could make more money. He didn't care that children like Alice would have nowhere to go. Leonard's jaw tightened with anger. He decided to invite Mr. Vance to a private dinner meeting. He wanted to see exactly how this man acted when he thought he was more important than everyone else. At the same time, the tension inside the Dante house was growing like a dark cloud. Dora was becoming very suspicious of her husband. While Leonard was changing his clothes, she went through his pockets and found the small, crumpled, "thank you" note written in crayon. Her face twisted with rage. She didn't think about a child. She assumed Leonard was seeing another woman behind her back. She thought he was hiding a secret lover who lived in a poor part of town. She didn't realize that the note came from a little girl who had saved his soul with a sandwich and a bandage. As Leonard planned his move against Mr. Vance, Dora began planning a way to destroy whoever had written that note. She had no idea that she was about to start a war with the only person Leonard now cared about. A week later, the city's richest people gathered at a luxury hotel for a grand charity gala. The room was filled with sparkling lights, expensive music, and people wearing clothes that cost a fortune. Leonard insisted on attending, which surprised everyone because he usually hated these events. He had a secret reason for being there. He had found out that Alice's mother, Sarah, was working as a waitress at this very party. He wanted to see her life for himself. During the party, Dora was walking through the crowd like she owned the world. She was in a terrible mood because Leonard was acting so distant. Suddenly, she tripped slightly and spilled a few drops of red wine on her expensive white dress. Her face turned red with anger. She looked for someone to blame and pointed her finger at the nearest server. It was Sarah. Dora began to scream at her, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She called Sarah terrible names and demanded that the hotel manager fire her right that second. "You're a nothing, a zero, you've ruined my night," Dora hissed. She was so angry that she didn't care who was watching. She wanted to humiliate the poor woman in front of everyone. The wealthy guests stood around in a circle. Some of them smirked, enjoying the drama, while others looked away because they were too embarrassed to help. Sarah just stood there with her head down, her hands shaking as she held her tray. Tears filled her eyes. She knew that if she lost this job, she and Alice would truly end up on the street. Dora, seeing that Sarah was not fighting back, raised her hand high in the air to slap her across the face. But before her hand could land, a strong, powerful grip caught her wrist in midair. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone turned to see Leonard standing there. His eyes were not warm. They were like pieces of cold ice. "She is more of a lady than you will ever be," Leonard said, his voice booming so loudly that even the people in the back of the room heard him. He let go of Dora's wrist with a look of disgust. Then he did something that shocked the entire city. He turned away from his wife and looked directly at the crying waitress. He softened his voice and asked, "How is Alice?" Sarah gasped, her eyes going wide. She looked at the sharp suit and the expensive watch, finally recognizing the face of the beggar she had fed in her tiny living room. The grand ballroom was filled with the sound of hundreds of people whispering at once. The guests were leaning in, their faces twisted with confusion. Why was the great Leonard Dante, the most feared man in the city, defending a simple waitress? Why did he know her daughter's name? Dora's face turned a bright, ugly shade of red. She felt humiliated in front of all her friends. "Leonard, what is wrong with you?" she shouted, not caring that people were staring. "Stop this right now. She is just a servant." Leonard did not look at the crowd. He looked at his wife with a look of pure disappointment. Then, he turned his head toward Mr. Vance, the greedy landlord who was standing nearby with a smug smile on his face. Leonard's voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes before a storm. "Actually," Leonard said, making sure every person in the room could hear him, "this woman and her little girl are the only reason I am breathing today. While I was dying in the mud, she was the only one who helped." He snapped his fingers and his right-hand man, Jack, stepped forward. Jack was carrying a thick stack of legal papers. Leonard looked directly at Mr. Vance, whose smile slowly began to disappear. "Mr. Vance," Leonard said, "I heard you like buying buildings and throwing people out. Well, I have some news for you. I just bought your entire company. I own everything you think is yours." Vance's face went pale as he began to shake. "And your very first task," Leonard continued, "is to realize that you are fired. Get out of my sight." But Leonard was not finished. He took one of the papers from Jack and handed it to Sarah, who was still trembling. "Also," Leonard announced to the room, "I have purchased the apartment building where Sarah lives. As of this moment, I am gifting the entire building to her. She is no longer a tenant, she is the owner." The twist shocked everyone. The wealthy guests gasped, and some even dropped their glasses. Leonard wasn't just being nice. He was completely destroying the people who had been cruel and greedy. He looked around at the elite people in their diamonds and silk. He told them the truth, that while he was bleeding in the rain, they were probably busy planning how to steal his money. But a little girl with nothing in her pockets had saved his life with a simple bandage. For the first time, the powerful people in that room felt very, very small. The emotional climax of the night happened right there in the middle of the sparkling ballroom. Sarah started to cry, but this time, the tears were not from fear or sadness. They were tears of pure relief. She looked at the papers in her hand and then at Leonard, unable to find the words to thank him. Leonard didn't need words. He turned his back on his wife, the flashing cameras of the reporters, and the shocked faces of the rich guests. He didn't care about the party or his reputation anymore. He gently took Sarah's arm and walked her toward the exit, ignoring the people who tried to stop him for an interview. Leonard didn't call for a driver. He got behind the wheel of his own car and drove Sarah back to her neighborhood himself. The bright lights of the city blurred past as they left the world of greed behind. When the big, black car pulled up to the old apartment building, Alice was already waiting by the front door, looking out into the night. When she saw the car stop, her eyes grew wide. She saw a man step out wearing a sharp, expensive suit, his hair neatly combed and his face clean. To the rest of the world, this man was a scary mafia boss. To the people in that ballroom, he was a powerful billionaire. But Alice didn't see any of that. She only saw the man she had helped when he was down. She let out a happy shout and ran as fast as her small legs could carry her. She threw her arms around Leonard's waist and gave him a giant hug. "You look so much better, mister," she cheered, looking up at him. "You even got a haircut." Leonard Dante, the man who was famous for never showing a single emotion, did something that would have shocked his enemies. He knelt down right there in the dusty hallway, not caring about his expensive pants. He wrapped his arms around the little girl and hugged her back tightly. In that moment, he realized a powerful truth. He had billions of dollars in the bank, but all that money couldn't buy the warm, honest feeling of a child's hug. With a soft voice, Leonard told Alice and her mother that their days of worrying were over. They would never have to fear a landlord or a hungry night again. He looked Alice in the eyes and made a final promise. He told her that when she grew up, he would pay for her to go to the best medical school in the world so she could achieve her dream of helping people. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He had become a guardian. He finally had something worth protecting. The ending of Leonard Dante's old life was quick and powerful. He did not wait another day to change his world. He divorced Dora, and because of his power, he made sure she left with only what the law required. She lost the mansions and the respect she loved so much, but Leonard didn't care. He realized that a house filled with gold is still empty if there is no love inside. Leonard also began to change his business. He moved away from the dark world of crime and started using his billions to fix the city. He built schools, repaired broken parks, and became a secret helper for many poor families. He still had his power, but he used it as a shield to protect the weak instead of a sword to hurt them. Now, every Sunday afternoon, a quiet peace settles over a beautiful new house on the edge of the city park. A big black car pulls up to the curb, but the neighbors no longer hide in fear. Leonard gets out of the driver's seat, wearing a soft sweater instead of a cold suit, carrying a box of the finest chocolates. Before he can even reach the front gate, the door flies open. Alice runs out across the green grass to meet him, her face glowing with joy as she shouts, "Uncle Leo." As he picks her up and hears her laugh, Leonard finally understands the greatest secret of all. True power is not about how many people are afraid of you. It is about how many people you have helped. The scary Ghost King is gone forever. He has been replaced by a man who knows that a single bandage and a half-eaten sandwich are worth more than a mountain of gold. The city still whispers the name of Leonard Dante, but now they whisper it with hope. He was once a monster, but a little girl showed him how to be a man. This story reminds us that kindness is a superpower we all have. You never know whose life you might change with just a small act of love. If you enjoyed this journey from the dark alleys to a new beginning, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us tell more stories of justice and heart. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a cinematic story like this one. What would you do if you found a stranger in need? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind, because the world is watching.